Michael crawled into Mossdale Caverns with a smile on his face. But by nightfall, his body would be swallowed forever by rising black water. The line could have been carved into stone, a cruel prophecy waiting beneath the moorland of Yorkshire, England. Michael was 24 years old, a passionate outdoorsman who balanced his job in Leeds with weekend expeditions into Britain's most unforgiving caves. Friends described him as fearless, a man who believed courage was earned only when one pressed beyond the point of comfort. That philosophy drove him toward Mossdale Caverns, a system infamous among cavers as one of the coldest, wettest, and most unpredictable underground labyrinths in the country. Mossdale was no beginner's playground. Its passages wound through tight, low corridors that flooded without warning, its ceilings dripping constantly, its floors slick with mud. The cave had been explored since the 1920s, but veterans spoke of it with respect, edged in fear. Stories of close calls, near drownings, and rescues gone wrong followed its name like shadows. Michael knew the risks. Still, he insisted this was the challenge he had been waiting for. That June morning, he stood with 5 companions at the windswept entrance, a jagged slit in the limestone hillside. Rain clouds loomed on the horizon, but the moors were quiet, the air heavy with the smell of wet grass. The group exchanged nervous grins as they tightened straps, checked helmet lamps, and zipped their waterproof suits. One of them joked, "Mossdale doesn't like visitors." Michael smirked, pulling his gloves tighter. "Then we'll make it like us." The first step down was like entering another world. The daylight vanished quickly, swallowed by black corridors that exhaled damp, frigid air. Water dripped from every crack, pattering against helmets like an endless clock. The sound of boots splashing through shallow pools echoed far ahead, disappearing into the darkness. Michael led the way, crawling through the first muddy crawl space, his lamp beam slicing across glistening stone. The passage pressed low against his back, already demanding discomfort from anyone who entered. Behind him the others followed, their laughter bouncing strangely in the confined tunnels. Every adventure begins with confidence, and this one was no different. The group was prepared, their spirits high, their minds set on discovery. They had no idea that the cave above them would soon fill with water, sealing the exits, silencing their voices. And as Michael disappeared deeper into the labyrinth, the storm clouds gathered silently over the moors, waiting for the moment to strike. The entrance to Mossdale Caverns looked deceptively harmless, little more than a crack in the moorland limestone, half hidden by grass and peat. Yet those who knew its name understood it was a threshold into one of the most dangerous places beneath British soil. Cold air poured upward from the opening, smelling of stone, mud, and the faint tang of stagnant water. Michael crouched first, his helmet lamp piercing into the slit of darkness. Behind him, his 5 companions adjusted their packs. They were a mix of seasoned cavers and enthusiastic newcomers, united by the thrill of testing themselves against one of Britain's harshest systems. Their gear was basic but functional: helmets with carbide lamps, ropes, harnesses, waterproof suits, and a handful of food and water tucked away in metal tins. The atmosphere brimmed with nervous excitement. Someone muttered, "Looks tighter than I imagined." Michael grinned without turning. That's the point. His voice carried a confidence that gave the others just enough courage to follow. One by one they slid into the earth, boots scraping against slick stone, hands grasping cold ledges for balance. The sound of their movements echoed unnaturally, swallowed quickly by the cave's vast silence. Above ground the moors stretched quiet and gray. Below, the world shrank to rock, mud, and shadows. The first passage demanded a crawl through thick mud, their bodies dragging forward while water splashed beneath their chests. Helmets scraped, gloves sank, and laughter occasionally broke the tension. A splash drew chuckles when one of them slipped, face first, into a shallow pool. "You'll get used to that," Michael teased, his words bouncing off the walls. As they pressed deeper, the space widened briefly, giving them a chance to crouch upright. They paused, lamps revealing limestone carved smooth by centuries of rushing water. The walls glistened, their surfaces cold and slick. The cave dripped steadily, droplets falling with a rhythm that felt almost alive. Despite the discomfort, spirits remained high. The team spoke of pushing far into the caverns, of mapping stretches that few had dared to attempt. Michael, especially, carried the energy of someone who believed the cave could be conquered with determination alone. Yet Mossdale had already begun to show its teeth. The water brushed higher against their boots, and the passages ahead narrowed into darker, wetter squeezes. The sound of flowing currents grew louder, a reminder that the cave's true danger was not stone, but water. Still, no one suggested turning back. Their lamps pierced forward, their bodies crawled deeper, and laughter kept the fear at bay. Above them, the sky was darkening, clouds thickening into a promise of rain. And underground, the group crawled on, unaware that each splash of water at their feet was a warning of what was about to come. The deeper they moved into Mossdale Caverns, the harsher the environment became. The air grew colder, each breath thick with moisture that clung to their throats. Water coated the limestone, slick under gloves and boots, while the low ceilings forced them into exhausting crouches and belly crawls. Every inch forward demanded energy, muscles tightening from the strain of constant contortions. Michael pressed ahead with determination. His lamp beam cut across the walls, revealing streaks of mud where countless explorers had crawled before. Behind him, one of his companions muttered through clenched teeth, "This place is relentless." Michael only chuckled, his voice echoing faintly in the blackness. "That's why it's worth it." The group waded through shallow pools that quickly rose to their thighs. Freezing water soaked through their waterproof layers, chilling them to the bone. Each step splashed heavily, the sound amplified until it seemed the entire cave was alive with movement. Their breath fogged in the damp air, steam rising from their bodies as exhaustion set in. To mask the unease, they joked and laughed. Someone made a quip about Mossdale being Britain's biggest washing machine, and the laughter eased the tension for a moment. But even through the humor, their faces carried shadows of discomfort. Joints ached, backs stiffened, and the mud sucked greedily at every step. The passages narrowed again, forcing them to crawl on hands and knees. Their helmets scraped rock overhead, sparks of sound sharp against the steady drip of water. Michael's shoulders pressed tightly against the limestone as he wriggled forward, the mud sucking at his chest. He paused only long enough to call back encouragement. "Keep moving. It opens up ahead." It did open, slightly. A wider chamber allowed them to sit upright and catch their breath. Lamps reflected off pools of water, turning the chamber into a shimmering, ghostly space. They rested briefly, eating small rations, their gloves shaking slightly from the cold. The silence pressed in, broken only by the echo of droplets and the faint trickle of unseen currents. Michael leaned against the wall, his hair damp with condensation. His eyes gleamed with excitement despite the discomfort. "We're making good time," he said, though his voice betrayed the weight of fatigue. No one contradicted him, but the looks exchanged among the group told another story. They all felt the cave tightening around them. The subtle warning signs had already begun. Water levels seemed just a little higher than they expected. The currents tugged faintly at their legs in places that should have been calm. The cave groaned with a low, steady sound, as though something deep within was shifting. But Michael pressed forward, determined to see more, to prove Mossdale could be endured. His friends followed, laughter fading, silence thickening, the cold pressing deeper into their bones. And as they crawled on, the water lapping higher against their suits, the storm above the moors was beginning to gather its strength. The group pushed further, the tunnels pressing down until every movement felt like a test of endurance. Their lamps cut thin beams through the damp air, glinting off streams that ran steadily across the stone. The sound of flowing water grew louder, no longer just drips but a constant hiss echoing from deeper passages. They reached one of Mossdale's notorious sections, a flooded crawl space where the ceiling dipped so low that their faces nearly touched the water. Michael crouched at the front, testing the passage with cautious hands. The current tugged at his gloves, cold and steady, as though warning him away. He hesitated only a moment before forcing a grin back at his companions. "It's passable. Stay low. Keep moving." They followed, bellies pressed flat to the rock, water brushing their cheeks as they crawled through. Each breath was loud in the confined airspace, the ceiling just inches above their heads. The claustrophobia was suffocating, but they pressed forward, dragging themselves out into another chamber where the water settled waist-high. There the cave's mood shifted. The air was heavier, their lamps reflecting off ripples that moved faster than before. The walls seemed to groan faintly with the weight of unseen water. One of the younger men whispered, "Feels like it's rising." Jason, another in the group, frowned but said nothing. His silence carried more fear than words. Michael noticed it too. The current that should have been calm was stronger, swirling against his legs. He glanced back, his smile faltering. "We'll be fine. Just don't stop." But above ground, the storm was already breaking. Rain pounded the moors, streams overflowing and disappearing into the limestone cracks that fed directly into Mossdale's veins. Underground, the first signs appeared in subtle shifts. Trickles became steady flows. Droplets multiplied into streams running down the walls. They pressed deeper still, though unease settled over the group. The laughter from earlier was gone, replaced by silence and quick glances between them. The cave seemed alive, as if its walls were breathing heavier with every step. Another chamber forced them into debate. The water here was chest deep, the current pulling harder than before. One of them muttered, "We should turn back." Michael hesitated, jaw tight. His lamp beam danced across the swirling black water, and he shook his head. "We've come too far. It won't get worse." But the cave was already shifting. Thunder rolled faintly above, muffled by earth, and the water dripping from the ceiling struck faster, louder, like a drumbeat counting down. Still, Michael pressed onward, his boots sloshing through the rising current. The others followed reluctantly, their hearts pounding with unspoken dread. And as they crawled deeper into the labyrinth, the storm above was preparing to unleash its full force into the passages below. The first surge came without warning. One moment the group was wading waist-deep through a narrow corridor, the next a roar echoed from behind, a sound like thunder exploding inside the earth. A wall of water burst into the passage, slamming against their backs, extinguishing laughter, replacing it with raw terror. "Move," Michael shouted, his voice cracking as the icy flood surged higher. The narrow tunnel transformed into a rushing channel, currents clawing at their legs, pulling with relentless force. Their lamps flickered wildly, beams bouncing off the churning black surface. The group scrambled forward, scraping hands and knees against jagged limestone, desperate to escape the torrent behind them. But Mossdale's passages were merciless. Low ceilings pressed against their backs, squeezing them flat as water rose to their chests. Each breath was stolen between waves slapping against their faces. Michael tried to lead, pushing into a narrow squeeze, his chest scraping against the stone. The water filled behind him, swirling higher, sucking at his boots. He shoved forward, ribs pressing painfully against the rock, arms straining in the confined space. His breath came in shallow gasps, every inhale sounding louder than the rushing flood. Behind him, shouts of panic filled the chamber. One companion yelled, "It's blocked! We can't go back!" Another voice cried out as water swallowed words into muffled gurgles. The cave was no longer stone and mud. It was a trap, filling with death. Michael's lamp beam shook violently, reflecting against the slick rock just inches from his face. His lungs burned as he tried to push further, but the squeeze tightened, compressing his chest until he could barely expand it. Water lapped at his chin, icy and merciless. He coughed, choking on the spray. "Help me!" His voice cracked into the darkness, a plea swallowed instantly by the roar of the flood. Jason grabbed at his ankle, trying to pull him back, but the current pinned them both in place. The stone pressed harder, the water rose faster. The passage groaned with the sound of rushing streams feeding from above. Every crack in the ceiling became a spout, pouring more into the corridor. The flood was not stopping. It was building. Michael twisted, desperate for space, his body trembling with exhaustion. His helmet scraped loudly, sparks of pain shooting down his spine as the rock refused to yield. The black water rose to his mouth, forcing him to tilt his head sideways for a final breath. And there, in the narrowest squeeze, the cave revealed its full cruelty. His chest heaved against immovable walls, lungs starving, water pressing higher. He gasped once more, eyes wide with terror. The cave had become a coffin, and the flood was sealing it shut. The passage exploded with chaos. Water rushed in torrents, smashing against their bodies, dragging them toward the constrictions. The roar of the flood drowned out their cries, a deafening surge that turned every word into a muffled echo. Panic spread like fire in the dark. Michael's companions clawed at the walls, searching for any handhold, any ledge to pull themselves upward. Their gloves slipped on smooth limestone, their legs dragged by the relentless current. One of them tried to climb into a side crack, only to be swept back down. His scream cut off as his headlamp vanished beneath the black water. Michael gasped violently, forcing his face above the surface for a moment before another wave slammed into him. His chest burned, his throat filled with icy spray. "Air!" he choked, his voice lost in the roar. He pushed desperately forward, but the squeeze ahead only tightened, his ribs crushing against stone as the current pressed harder from behind. The cave transformed into a nightmare maze of drowning chambers. Each space filled faster than the last, ceilings dipping so low that only inches of air remained. Their lamps reflected against the rising surface, beams dancing wildly before being swallowed by darkness. Fear broke the group's fragile unity. Some tried to swim forward, others hammered against stone with bare fists, desperate for an opening. The sound of frantic splashes, coughing, and sobs echoed like a chorus of despair. Michael's vision blurred, his lungs heaving painfully. His arms trembled as he clawed at the rock, fingernails tearing through soaked gloves. The cold was unbearable, slicing through his muscles until every movement felt sluggish, weak. His breath shortened into ragged gasps, each one more desperate than the last. Water pressed against his face, forcing him to tilt his head awkwardly to sip the thin layer of air beneath the ceiling. The space shrank with every heartbeat. He coughed violently, choking on the spray. "I can't." His words dissolved into gurgles. Jason, just behind him, shouted through clenched teeth, "Keep fighting. Don't stop." His voice trembled, the command more plea than encouragement. But the cave showed no mercy. The flood roared louder, filling every pocket, erasing every chance. Michael's body jerked with panic, chest heaving, lungs screaming for oxygen that no longer existed in the black corridor. The water surged higher, covering mouths, noses, lamps. Each second pushed them closer to the inevitable. And in that suffocating dark, Michael felt the final wave crash into him, dragging him deeper into the passage. The screams faded, replaced by the relentless sound of water, sealing the fate of those still trapped inside. Above ground, the storm raged across the moors, rain hammering the limestone, streams overflowing and pouring directly into Mossdale's hidden veins. Survivors who had clawed their way back to the entrance stumbled into the downpour, soaked, shaking, and gasping for breath. Their faces were pale with shock, their eyes wide with horror. "We need help now," one of them shouted, collapsing onto the wet grass. Within hours, word spread across Yorkshire. Rescuers, cavers, police, and volunteers rushed to the site, hauling ropes, pumps, floodlights, and stretchers. The moorland filled with the glow of lanterns and the roar of engines, a desperate command post forming at the cave mouth. Teams prepared for the descent, strapping on waterproof gear and switching on headlamps. One veteran rescuer muttered grimly, "Mossdale doesn't give people back easily." With that, they disappeared into the slit of earth, crawling into the same suffocating darkness that had already swallowed Michael and his companions. Inside, the water was merciless. Passages that were normally thigh-deep now roared with torrents, blocking progress. Rescuers fought their way forward, crawling against the current, their lamps bouncing across the black flood. Every chamber echoed with the deafening rush of water. They shouted names into the void. "Michael! Jason! Anybody!" But no reply came. The only answer was the hiss and crash of unseen streams pouring from above. At points, they were forced to stop, the airspace reduced to just a few inches. One rescuer pressed his cheek against the ceiling, panting, before turning back. "We can't go further. It's sealed." Above ground, officials debated. Rain showed no sign of stopping. The water levels inside Mossdale rose with every passing hour. Radios crackled with grim updates. Passages impassable, visibility zero, current too strong. The mood grew heavier as the reality set in. Families had gathered near the entrance, huddled under tarps, waiting for news. Mothers wept quietly. Fathers stared blankly into the storm. Every face turned when rescuers emerged, dripping, shivering, shaking their heads. More attempts followed through the night. Ropes were anchored, pumps deployed, but Mossdale's system was vast, fed by countless unseen inlets. The cave swallowed the rain faster than any human effort could fight it. By dawn, the truth was undeniable. Michael and the others were trapped beyond reach, sealed behind walls of black water. The rescuers stood in silence at the entrance, mud streaking their faces, exhaustion weighing down their bodies. One whispered, "They're gone." And though no one wanted to say it aloud, everyone understood. Mossdale had claimed them, and nothing could be done to bring them back. Deep inside Mossdale, Michael's world had collapsed into darkness, water, and stone. The flood had swallowed every passage, every chamber, every breath of air. His body was pinned against the limestone, chest heaving violently as he fought for space that no longer existed. The roar of the water was deafening, a constant thunder that drowned out thought. His lamp flickered weakly, casting frantic beams across the ceiling, inches above his face. Every drop of air was disappearing, replaced by freezing black water that surged higher and higher. Michael tilted his head desperately, gasping for the last thin layer clinging beneath the rock. His lips broke the surface for a final breath, lungs screaming as they filled with precious oxygen. He coughed, choking on spray, eyes wide with panic. His hands clawed at the stone, fingernails scraping uselessly against the smooth walls. His chest compressed, ribs pressing painfully against the unyielding limestone. He tried to push upward, but the current forced him down, the squeeze too tight to allow escape. His body convulsed with the primal instinct to breathe, to fight, to live. The water rose again, icy and relentless. It touched his eyes, his forehead, his scalp. His mouth opened in a strangled gasp, but only water rushed in. He gagged violently, thrashing against the stone, every muscle screaming with the agony of suffocation. Darkness crept in at the edges of his vision. The roar of the cave dulled to a hollow hum, as though the world itself were slipping away. He thought of air, of daylight, of the moors above, impossibly far and forever out of reach. Above ground, rescuers strained their ears in the flooded corridors, but there was no cry, no voice, no sound left to answer them. Only the endless rush of water filling the cave, sealing the fate of those inside. Michael's final moments were silent but brutal. His lungs burned like fire before collapsing into stillness, his body twitching once, then going limp as the cave consumed him. The water surged on, erasing every trace of his struggle, every scream, every breath. Mossdale had claimed another life, drowning him in black silence. And as the rescuers outside continued their desperate fight, Michael's agony had already ended, buried forever beneath the roar of the flood. The storm raged on as word of the disaster spread across Yorkshire. Newspapers caught wind of the unfolding tragedy, reporters gathering on the moors with cameras and notebooks. Families stood in the rain, eyes red and swollen, waiting for news they already feared was hopeless. Mossdale had never been forgiving, and now it had sealed itself with a flood no human could challenge. Rescuers, exhausted and mud-soaked, emerged from the cave one by one. Their faces told the story before their words did. Haunted eyes, trembling hands, heads shaking slowly. "We can't reach them," one whispered. The current was too strong, the passages too narrow, the air pockets gone. The cave had become a tomb. Officials debated through the night. Some argued for continued attempts, but the risk was clear. Sending more rescuers inside meant sending them to the same fate. The rain continued to hammer the land, the water level inside Mossdale rising higher with each hour. Finally, the decision was made. No more attempts. The bodies would remain underground. The families broke down when the truth was delivered. Mothers screamed into the storm, fathers collapsed into the mud. Siblings clung to one another in silence. Michael's name joined the others on the list of the lost, etched into the memory of Mossdale as part of Britain's worst caving disaster. Over the following days, the entrance was fortified, then sealed with concrete. Authorities declared Mossdale Caverns permanently closed, a grave that would never release those inside. Michael and his companions were left where they had fallen, encased in stone and water, their voices silenced forever. News of the tragedy spread across the country, shocking those who had never heard of the cave before. Headlines called it Britain's underground catastrophe. While veteran cavers shook their heads, saying Mossdale had always been a death trap waiting to spring. Debates flared about responsibility, about whether such extreme exploration should be allowed at all. But for the families, those arguments meant little. Their loved ones were gone, unreachable, sealed in darkness. Jason, one of the survivors, struggled to speak when asked about Michael. His voice cracked as he repeated the last words he had heard echoing in the tunnels. "I can't breathe." The memory haunted him, replaying every night, a reminder of the thin line between adventure and death. In the end, Mossdale Caverns remained silent. The storm passed, the moors dried, but beneath the limestone, 6 young men lay entombed forever. Michael among them, his final moments hidden, his story carried only by those who survived to tell it. Mossdale Caverns stands today not as a place of discovery, but as a grave. Beneath the rolling moors of Yorkshire, behind the sealed concrete at its entrance, 6 young men remain entombed, their voices silenced by the black waters that rushed through the passages that fateful day. Among them is Michael, remembered not just as a victim, but as a symbol of how quickly adventure can turn to tragedy. The disaster left a scar on Britain's caving community. For years, Mossdale had been a challenge whispered among explorers, a system known for its tight squeezes, frigid water, and unpredictable floods. After June of 1967, its name carried a new weight, a warning. The cave was officially closed, its entrance sealed, its depths declared too dangerous for any rescue or recovery. Yet the story did not fade. Cavers across the world spoke of Mossdale in hushed tones, comparing its dangers to other infamous sites where the earth refused to give back the dead. The image of young men crawling beneath the moors, laughing, joking, only to be swept into darkness, remained etched into the imagination. Michael's ordeal, in particular, captured the horror of claustrophobia and drowning combined, the most primal of fears realized in stone and water. For his family, the loss was unmeasurable. They were forced to accept that his body would never be returned, that his grave was the cave itself. For survivors like Jason, the memories became inescapable. He carried the sound of Michael's final cries, "I can't breathe," a phrase that would never leave his mind, echoing in every silence. Mossdale's legacy is now one of warning. Guides, writers, and rescuers reference the disaster as proof of nature's unforgiving power. Claustrophobia, rising water, suffocation. These are not abstract fears, but realities faced by those who enter the underground unprepared for its cruelty. To this day, the concrete seal remains, moss and grass creeping over it as the moorland reclaims the wound. Beneath, the black corridors still exist, silent and cold, holding forever the lives they once consumed. The cave is closed, but the story remains open, a haunting reminder of risk, courage, and the razor-thin line between life and death. Michael's tragedy is more than history. It is a lesson etched into the stone. Some places are not meant to be conquered. They are meant to be feared. And though Mossdale Caverns may never echo with human voices again, the silence it keeps is louder than any scream. For more true cave stories, tragic, chilling, and unforgettable, follow this channel.